Hey guys, this is Brian Townsend.
And Internet Pokers.
We are here for part two of Internet Poker's heads-up match against Nikki Jedlicka. Part one went really well for Internet Pokers. He probably played, maybe 50 to 100 hands and was up somewhere between 12 and 15K, and pretty much having a lot of success this match. And Nikki on the left, he had just won a big pot and had yet to rebuy, but was about to.
Right. So yeah, I'd say a lot of the reads that we're going to have on Nikki are things that we took over from the previous match. But just to give kind of a quick recap, so far our reads on Nikki is that he's a pretty aggressive player. Doesn't really like to fold his hands on earlier streets and is pretty loose in a lot of situations as far as peeling, calling hands, three betting, whatnot. So that's definitely something that is going to be our the primary read that we have on him is that he's a very loose and aggressive player. And if you want to know some of the history, then I'd probably recommend that you watch some of the previous matches. But as far as dynamics that we've built up, there hasn't been a lot that, in particular, that's happened other than sort of relatively standard spots.
So I guess to counter somebody like this, who is going to be floating a lot out of position, with my hands that have marginal showdown against a loose aggressive player like this who floats out of position, I would want to do a lot where I would bet the flop and check back the turn because he's an aggressive player and he'll check raise quite a bit on the turn, and I'd like to show down a lot of hands against him. And I would rather take the bet line more when I add pure air, and then when I have kind of something with marginal showdown, I check back and call a river bet type of things. Because we saw one hand where he check called out of position on a queen five rainbow flop, and that's a spot where he check called with like no pair, no draw. I mean, he had like king jack 9-6 or something. So
Mm-hmm.
we don't mind letting him see a turn card there if we're holding pocket queen or pocket jacks or something. So I think against an opponent like this, I'd want to bet a lot on the flop and then check a lot of turns and call a lot of river bets.
Right. But I mean, considering that we're playing PLO, in a lot of situations, it's not all that likely that our opponent is just pure floating us like he can on like a queen five board. So I mean, there are a lot of situations in which, even if we did have pocket jacks in a lot of spots, we'd prefer to bet just to get our opponents off a lot of hands that would nonetheless have a lot of equity against us. Don't you think?
I don't think there's always, I mean, even if they're realizing 20% equity, I think it can far outweigh the times that we pick off a bluff. So I think usually against an opponent like this, we're going to show a bigger profit by checking, even though we know that, maybe we're checking something like top and bottom pair on a 9-6 deuce flop. The turn is a 5, putting out a couple straight
Mm-hmm.
draws. Well, we know he would peel with pretty much on the flop with pretty much any decent pair or any gut shot or anything like that. Well, that might be a spot with our nines and deuces to check back and call some good river cards for us. Because if we bet the turn, he might bluff raise us some of the time.
Right. Yeah. I mean, but that's kind of a standard spot not to be betting your hand on the turn, considering how many hands improved.
Well, a lot of the time in spots like that, I'll just go ahead and bet fold because it's against a lot of opponents, they're very unlikely to raise you there without
Right.
a hand
Right.
that did improve. And so it's not a big deal to fold your four outs or whatever, to bet fold your four outs to protect your hand against other random draws. But against a guy like Nicky, who I'm not as comfortable bet folding because I think he's a little bit trickier than a lot of people you'll face, I wouldn't want to do that. So.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and start the match and see how it plays out from here. As you see, he's short stacked on the left table.
On the right,
So I
what's your four betting range and frequency? Do you want to talk a little bit about that? What goes into your mind when you determine if you're going to four bet somebody a little bit lighter?
Right. Well, basically, if I see somebody who's three betting me a lot, and I feel like they're the kind of opponent who, well, I mean, in PLO, it's relatively easy to play in a four betting game, like compared to a game like NL or something, because if somebody four bets you and you three bet with a half decent hand, you're pretty much obligated to call, then you pretty much know which flops are okay to get it in with. So it's more of a question of frequency than it is of, how to play individual hands. Since in a way, when you get four bet, your hand almost plays itself, or if you, kind of know what you're doing. So as far as what I want to be four betting against this guy, I would say if I had obviously if I had like a double suited wrap here instead of a rainbow, I'd probably be four betting as Nicky because I think he three bets a lot of hands that a wrap like this would dominate. But a rainbow I don't think has enough equity against his range and doesn't flop well enough for me to be four betting it. But in this session in and of itself, although it hasn't been a ton of hands, Nicky hasn't done a lot of 3-betting, but he has in previous matches that I've played him. So I'm not sure whether or not he's just calmed down, or he hasn't really picked up many hands, or just doesn't feel like 3-betting a lot. But I'm gonna keep that read in mind, that I think he can be at the very least an aggressive 3-better. So. Of course, I would 4-bet him with any aces and whatnot, and really strong wraps. But as far as hands other than that, I'm not really sure as to within this session how light I should be 4-betting him.
Yeah, I would say against a guy like Nicky, I would 4-bet good kings as well. I think
Right.
4-betting something like, say you had king king 10-6 single suited, I think that might be a little too light to 4-bet him. But I would go ahead and 4-bet any double suited kings, king king, any single suited connected kings. That would kind of be the bottom end of my range in terms of big pair value. Then I would also be 4-betting with, like you said, a lot of good double suited rundowns. Anything basically, even maybe as weak as 4, 5, 6, 7 double suited, though that might be a little too weak. But definitely like 7, 8, 9, 10 double suited, or a hand like you have double suited, and then also good big pair. And against a guy like Nicky, there's some players I would never 4-bet a hand like ace king queen 10 single suited against, but against a guy like Nicky, I would go ahead and 4-bet my good ace king hands.
Yeah, I'd be pretty inclined to 4-bet those sorts of hands against him as well, because like I said, he 3-bets a lot of hands, which would include a lot of stuff like, like ace queen jack 8 or something, or hands like that have 3 high cards and one dangler that he 3-bets pretty frequently. So
against that too, I would also want it to at least be suited to the ace, but preferably double suited there. Because the problem is those times you do run into aces, your equity is quite bad, and most of the time you're not going to have a huge equity edge against your opponent. So the times you do run into aces or really good kings, you're going to have aces probably 25 to 30% equity depending on flush draws being covered and other side cards. And if you run into kings, you'll probably have 40% to 45% equity. So the times that you do run into really good hands like that with your ace king queen 10 really negate the times when he 4-bets you with jack 9, 5, 6 double suited, calls the 4-bet and then gets it in on a lot of flops. Because there, you only have a 40% equity edge pre-flop, maybe not even, or 60% equity edge pre-flop, maybe not that much. So there's not a whole lot of value in 4-betting those ace king queen 10 hands, and I really would want double suited, and if it was rainbow, I wouldn't even consider it.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Okay, so I flat a 3-bet here with jack 10 9 7, and the flop comes king queen deuce with 3 spades, and so he checks it to me, and I feel pretty obligated to bet it here. I mean, I have a reasonably strong wrap if he is checking a hand less than a flush. So I have a lot of equity here if he has like a set or something, or 2-pair like ace king queen or something. So I decided to go ahead and fire out the flop, which seems pretty mandatory.
Yeah, I think betting the flop is 100% standard.
Right.
I think a lot of the time.
Do you think my bet here is a little too big?
I think it's fine. I think 1200 is fine. I think a problem is a lot of the times people will use like pot control lines when they re-raise and they flop like a 7 high flush here. But
yeah, that's definitely something that I'd expect most players to do here if they flop like 5 high or 8 high flush to check the flop and try to induce some bets.
Totally. But still, I still think you have to go ahead and bet this, so I don't really see another option.
But like we said before, we know that Nicky likes to peel pretty light in the flop, so I hit it straight on the turn, which makes it easy for me to check my hand down now and kind of hope that he has, maybe pocket queens or a king queen, whatever hand. But if the turn wasn't a 10, would you fire again? Let's say the turn was like an offsuit 5.
Not against a guy like Nicky, no.
Not against Nicky.
I mean, some of the time I would, obviously, but with no history against him, without having played quite a bit, I would just give up.
More often than not, you would just give up.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely would if we'd been playing for a while, but kind of that first time when he check calls, I just think he has a flush so often, and I just don't think he's going to fold a flush when he goes into this check call line unless you're willing to fire the river. I mean, if you want to bet like 2,800 here and shove the river, I think that's fine. But even that against a guy like Mickey, I don't really love.
Right. Yeah, I mean, he definitely has a knack for putting people on very small hand ranges.
Yeah. Eh,
And my Jack 10 ends up being good when I hit the straight on the river. So on the left, I 3-bet. Did I 3-bet? Yes, I did.
Yeah.
And he's playing 1,800 deep, so a 3-betting hand like this is pretty standard, right?
Yeah, it's fine. I mean, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's
So I flop the nut straight, and then I just ship it in, I assume. Or I might check here. I don't remember which one I do.
I mean, I think you can.
And he ended up, you saw in the previous hand, he ended up having,
Wow.
where is that?
Wow. So he just
Ace, King, 7-9, yeah.
pretty
Yeah,
fit.
so he peeled the flop super, super light. He just had a pair of kings,
So
no
it's
redraw.
worth noting what he's going into check call mode with, and
Yeah.
I mean, we got to start firing a turn
Mm-hmm.
barrel there a lot then.
Right. So the ace, queen, 10, I end up checking on the flop. What do you think of this?
I don't think it matters much. I would just ship it in. I mean, what hand are you re-raising that he has that little money, and are you checking? Like aces, you know? Like,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I want him to think that I have a hand like bare aces, and I want him to shove like a 10xxx to try to get me off of that hand.
but even like bare aces, you would just ship the flop. I mean, I just go on the flop, I think.
Right. I mean, it doesn't make much of a difference with the stack size.
With the stack size, there's no hand that he's betting if you check that he wouldn't call a shove with anyway. You know what I mean? He's not
Yeah,
like
yeah.
all of a sudden going to be like, oh, I have 5, 6, 7, 8. I'm just going to go on some random bluff. Where
Right, but I mean, if he has, like some random low cards in the 10 or a jack,
he'll call
I
you.
mean, there's a reasonable chance he might fold if I jam the flop, isn't there?
No way. Any pair
No.
he'll call you with. Any pair, anything he'll call. I mean, all he's got is 1,000. There's what, 1,800 in the pot.
Right, yeah,
He's
yeah. I
got
guess
such
that,
compelling odds. He's
not really gonna
he's
fold
going to put
anything.
you on bare aces and call you with anything that has odds against him. So
Okay. So on the right, I 3-bet aces with a 6-10, which gives me a gutter on the flop, and I 3-bet him pre-flop. He calls, and I just check the flop. So what's your plan here once you get to the spot where you haven't checked yet, assuming? What's your plan here with aces?
so you do have the ace of spades, which helps as a blocker. I would probably go ahead and check this flop as well. I just think it's too easy for your opponent to peel or play back at you with a lot of hands, especially a guy like Nicky. You know, against a tighter opponent, I might go ahead and just bet fold this flop because they're not going to really raise with a flush draw unless they have a really strong straight draw with it as well. But against a guy like Nicky, I could see him just going really aggro with something like 9-10 with a flush draw, you know, just like a 9-10 with spades or something, like with jack high or 10 high spades. So I don't
Right.
really like betting against Nicky here. But against tighter opponents, I would go ahead and just bet this flop. And
Okay.
now you got to bet
So
100% of the time because it looks so much like you were going to check raise the flop. Because, you know, if you had like aces nut flush draw, you would check raise this flop. You know, I would have bet the turn for sure. Is both for value, but also as a blocking bet. He's so rare
yeah.
flush, and yeah, it's just like you.
Yeah, I definitely should have bet the turn.
There's so many random hands that you don't want to give him a free look at the river with, and he'll fold so many hands when you bet the turn, and it looks so legitimate that you have a hand. I've had such good success getting folds in spots like that, where I re-raise
Right.
something like these aces, check the flop, and then bet the turn when a flush card hits.
hmm
And it's
Yeah,
also
I definitely agree. I don't like my turn check here.
yeah, and it's hard for him to represent anything with a raise. So he has to just basically, if he wants to combat that, he has to float you. So
Right.
yeah,
Well, he ended up showing his hand down. My aces wound up being good, but I agree with you. I should have bet the turn. Okay. It looks like I decided to 4-bet King, Jack, Queen, 5 double suited. And I assume this was because I thought he was 3-betting a lot, but looking back on the match now, it didn't seem like he was 3-betting all that much, really. So, I mean, in retrospect, clearly this is not a great idea. It doesn't have a lot of equity against most of the hands that he's getting all in with. And really, the play being any good kind of hinges on him 3-betting a ton of crap and then calling all of it and then playing very straightforwardly.
yeah.
So,
he'll get it in way too late on too many flops. The 5 is dangling too much. If the 5 were an 8, 9, 10, or ace of hearts, that would be fine. But with
Right.
the 5 is just really hurts your equity. I mean, you run into something like king, queen, jack 10, or just hands like that, ace, king, queen 10, all those type of hands he's three-betting that really have you crushed. Sure, sometimes you dominate some hands, but for the most part, you're not. I mean, his jack 10, 9, 8 hands have a lot of equity against this hand as well. Um,
Hmm.
I think this is pretty spewy. I think it's just a
Right.
little too.
And he ends up sticking it in. So I come and join him, and he has me pretty dominated
Oof.
here. He's got aces with king queen.
What would you have? Both your flush draws are live, though. I would guess you have 38% equity,
Yeah, probably something around there.
just because both your flush draws, but
Hmm.
not a great spot.
Oh,
But
but I end up pulling it out. Well, that's Omaha for you.
yeah.
So that's always fun. Okay, so on the right, I call out of the big blind with king queen 10-4, and then I flop top and bottom on a pretty dry board, and I decide to lead out pot, which I don't think I've done yet this match. So what do you think here about this spot?
I'm assuming you're folding when raised if you lead.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously with a top and bottom with no redraw on a really dry heavy board, there's not a lot I can do if I get raised.
How, I mean, what turns are you continuing on? I feel like he's not going to give you a whole lot of credit for this, and I feel like he's going to peel really lightly. And a lot of
Right.
turns are just going to be so hard for you to continue on. I mean, any ace, deuce, 3, 6, 7, even an 8, 9, 10, jack, like all these turns are just really tough. It's like one of those spots where I don't know if check calling is much better either. I mean, it's one of those spots where you just have a really marginal hand and you're out of position and it's just going to be hard to show it down.
Hmm.
Um,
Well, I mean, I think it was just kind of one of the spots where I didn't really want to check. I didn't want to check fold. I didn't want to check call. And didn't want to check raise. So I just bet out. I
yeah.
mean, there's not a ton of logic to it, but it kind of didn't feel quite as bad as the other options.
Yeah, I mean, I don't love it, but I just feel like he's going to peel so much in position, and it's going to be so hard to
Right.
decide what to do on the turn. But I would have check called. I mean, even a turn like this, I mean, you have to go ahead and bet here now that it kind of bricked off, but it's really not a great spot if he decides to raise you. I mean, you have to fold. Pretty much any turn, you have to bet a lot of them, and if raised, you have to fold. And that's just not really a great spot being out of position against good, trickier players.
Right.
So what would you do if you had a set of tens here?
Well, I'd probably end up check raising the flop because Nikki c-bets such a wide range and peels so light.
So your leading range would be what, top two or tens and fours?
Yeah, yeah, it would be two pairs, then probably some reasonably good draws, like maybe if I had 6, 7 of clubs or something. A draw like that, I don't really want to get all in with, but that still has a lot of equity against the lower part of his range. So that's another type of hand that I'd probably be inclined to lead out with.
Yeah.
Whereas, of course, if I had like a really, really strong hand, like ace X of clubs with a straight draw, then I'd be inclined to check raise rather. Anyway, so he pots me into me on the turn, and I mean he's obviously repping 6-3 or ace-3 here, which
I don't
isn't
think
that
he
hard to
misses the
represent.
turn with ace three this deep.
Right.
You guys are
That's definitely possible.
pretty deep. I think you would call with ace three. I think he's representing 3-6. So,
Hmm.
I mean, you really can't.
Um, yeah, there's not a lot I can do against his legitimate range. I have pretty much no equity here, and of course he can be raising here with a hand like a straight draw with clubs or something, or any sort of hand like that to basically get me off of a hand like 10-5 or maybe some other draw that I'm betting on the turn. But there's not a lot I can do here because my equity just isn't that good against anything that he has.
Yeah. It's actually a
So
great spot for him to flat call. I think this would be a really good line if he flat called the flop with like a non-nut draw. Like if he had Queen Jack 6-7 with Queen high clubs, flat call the flop and raise pot the turn, I think is a really good line by him because it gets you to fold out your bigger flush draws. And if you do run into a 3-6 or a set or something, you still have good equity. So I think that would be an interesting line, though you are a little bit deep. I'd like it a little more if it was 100 big.
Yeah, it's a lot easier to do with 100 big blinds than with 13 or 14, however much we had.
Yeah.
Right,
Okay, so you get 3-bet on the left. Did you debate 4-betting or because of the left? Like not.
I don't recall. I think it might have been a little bit gunshot after constantly 4-betting the better hands. But I ended up just calling it, and probably also because I know Nicky calls pretty much every single hand when I 4-bet him. So the hand like this, I'd much rather see the flop before I commit a lot of chips in.
Yeah.
So
I agree. I think this hand's just a tiny bit too weak to 4-bet against Nicky, and I would rather call as well.
So I flop a pretty strong hand. I flop top 2 pair, albeit on a straight board, and flush draw and straight draw as well. So I just bet out the flop, and he folds pretty quickly, so I take it down.
Yeah, I mean, that's a spot where you're going to be check raised by a bigger flush draw a lot when he looks to get it in. So, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a pretty, I guess, no-brainer spot to get it in if he does anything.
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, you're never doing anything else. So right. Here, yeah, you got a 4-bet.
Right. Yeah. So here I come up with more, a little more high cardish hand that to 4-bet him with, and double suited, which is always nice. And then he snap calls. I remember this hand actually. It's a pretty interesting hand. So the flop comes out 7-6-3, and we've got 10K stacks. So now the question is, first of all, the first question is, what do you think is okay? Nicky ends up checking here. I might as well spoil it. So Nicky checks the flop. So what do you think his range is for checking as opposed to just potting out the flop?
I think when he checks, his range is any 2-pair, any good straight draw, any 4-5, any pair and gutter even. I think he would pot it with his more marginal hands, maybe a dry 8-9. He would just pot into you or something like that. But I think when he checks, he's either got a hand with very little equity against aces or a hand with a lot of equity against aces.
Right. So here with basically no pair except one backdoor flush draw, and that's basically it. Do you elect to bet the flop or just give up?
I would.
He's got 10K and pots 5K.
I think there's just too many hands he can play back at you with, and it's too. Yeah, I would go ahead and give up. I would check with the back door. You can turn a king of diamonds. I mean, there aren't that many good turn cards for your hand, but I think you have to give up. I mean, you're getting check raised so much, and he's going to check raise you really lightly. Any pair and a gutter, maybe even any random pair.
Right. Yeah, I ended up betting, and I talked about it with a couple of people I know, and I ended up kind of regretting my bet here. What do you think about betting a size like maybe 1,800 on this flop?
I don't think it's going to change his. I mean,
well, it's not going to change his shoving range, of course.
I think then he might peel.
It is going to make it.
I think he'll peel then with things like queens, maybe. Whereas he might just them if you bet a little bit bigger. I think.
Yeah, but I mean, is that really so bad for me? If I'm getting a better price and maybe he calls a hand like queens.
I mean, then you have 6 outs and he's got like 7.
Well, yeah, but I can bluff the turn fairly effectively if he check calls an $1,800 bet. I kind of know what sort of hand he has.
Yeah, but he might also check call with 4-5, so bluffing the turn might not be such a profitable play.
Right. So you don't think betting any size works here?
I think betting is really bad here.
Okay.
Because there's just you're representing a hand that has such bad, even aces, which is like a good hand for you in that range, has so little equity on a board like that. And he knows that he knows he's getting such a good price to attack that flop that he's going to be with any pair and a gut shot, just anything.
Yeah. Anytime he hits it, he's going to be getting it in.
Yeah.
So.
I mean, yeah.
Right. So just kind of a spot where I guess I just made a mistake. Wasn't really sure whether or not that flop was okay to bet.
Yeah, I mean, it sucks because you got a flop that was in probably the bottom 5 to 10% of flops for your hand. And by that I mean it the flop of deuce, deuce, deuce isn't a great flop for you, but it's such a good flop for you to bluff because he's never going to be able to do anything about it. Whereas that flop, there's so many semi-bluffs that he could have in his range, or even strong made hands that he's going to play back at you a lot. And so yeah.
So it just kind of sucked in general.
It was just a flop for your hand is what it was.
Yeah.
He knows that. That's part of the problem. He's going to know that you're not going to have a lot of equity on that flop against a lot of things that he's representing, so he's going to attack it a lot.
Okay, so here on the right, I end up limping this hand 7-9, 5-3 with a kind of crappy suited part in the middle. Do you think this is an okay hand to limp call?
Yeah, I think if you're going to start limp calling, this is reasonable to do it with position.
Okay. And on the left, I called like kind of, I don't know how many out, straight draw, and then checked it down. And I checked it back on the flop. I don't really remember why. I had what do I have here? I have a gut shot, right?
I don't ever see him check folding that flop after he raised.
Yeah, I guess that's probably why.
He's always going to be check calling there.
The spot where it looks like a lot like he's trying to induce something.
I would have liked limping that 6-6-9-7 against a guy like Nickley, who's re-raising so much. That hand actually plays pretty well in a limp call pot with position, whereas you get 3-bet, it does not play that well in a 3-bet pot. I mean, basically you have to flop a 6 or a straight to continue, or a flush, but you're not really.
But you still call it, or would you just fold it pre-flop?
I would probably, after I raise, called, but folding is also fine pre-flop.
Right.
Depends how well.
Well, he is shorter, which makes a call easier, right?
I think it makes.
He's only got like 8.5, 8.4K here, right?
Yeah, I think it makes it a little more dubious because then he'll just be c-bet. I mean, you really just have no room to do anything, I mean, the deeper he is, the more your positional advantage will help you. But the shorter the stacks gets, the worse a hand like 6-6-9-7 is going to play, and the harder it's going to be to bluff him.
Okay. Looks like I min-bet the flop for some reason. I don't know if that was a mislead or if it was intentional, but either way, I guess it might work out for me.
Maybe you have the best hand.
No, you ended up check calling with ace-jack.
So it's just worth noting, and that's the type of hands that I would put him on. Pocket queens, pocket kings, ace-jack, all those hands that he wants to show down but doesn't want to bet and get raised with.
Right. Okay, so here on the right I raise queen 10-7-9, flop comes ace-4-7, and I just check it back on the flop with I guess all I have is really backdoor hearts.
Yep.
Do you think it's a standard spot to check?
I think your equity is so bad that I would probably just go ahead and bet, even though you are going to get raised a lot. But there's really, I mean, there's just not that many good turn cards for your hand, and it's hard for you to represent something on a lot of turns. Like when the turn is an ace, like this would be a nice spot where, you could raise, but it's so hard to represent anything now that you've checked the flop that I would just go ahead and bet fold the flop. With a hand like this with so little equity. I'd rather check back something with an ace in it.
Okay. So would you just fold the turn here?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I ended up calling because apparently I don't like Nicky at all, so I don't ever believe him.
Yeah.
And he checks it to me on the river, and I assume I just check it back.
Value bet here, it's like it's just not a great spot, and he's barreling the turn with those jacks and those type of hands that.
Right.
There aren't too many cards you're going to be able to bluff them on the river. You're not going to know if your Queen 7 is the best 2-pair and you just want to take a showdown, like if a straight card hits on the river. So it's just kind of a bad spot. Plus he can also check raise you with impunity on the river because you're never going to have a full house there, Like it's so rare you're checking. You might check back like top and bottom pair or something and have a full house, but You know, it's just
Not
small.
very likely.
Yeah, so it
Right.
just lets him play so well against you. You know.
Hmm. Okay. Well, here on the left, I flop a middle pair and a gutter, and I check back the flop, and I guess I just fold to a turn bet.
Yeah, I mean, I think a raise there against some opponents is really good because that's a board where you might check back a total dry nut flush draw, you know, like a nut flush draw with no pair, no gutter.
Hmm.
And I think it's fine to raise that turn then as a bluff some of the time.
Right. Well, it is one of those spots against Nicky where when I'm repping basically one or two hands, he's just not, he's just not going to believe me.
Exactly. A guy like Nicky, I would be less inclined to do it. But against some
Right.
opponents, I think it's fine.
So here on the right, I ended up limping a pretty crappy hand, 5-9-7, and with a queen that has there's nothing else to do with the hand.
Yeah. That's not a bad flop if he's not thinking hard about the match to attack. I mean, there's few hands that he could have that he can continue with on an ace-king 4 flop unless he's got like ace-king. I mean, it's hard for you to represent anything because you limp call.
Hmm.
But if you don't think he's thinking about that, and a lot of opponents won't, they'll just be like, oh, I got raised, I fold. This would be a good flop to make it like 1400.
Right. I mean, this is, I think, probably one of those spots where, despite that Nicky generally doesn't give anybody any respect, one of those spots where if I did raise, I'd probably get respect because you'd just never expect anybody to really bluff you in a spot where playing against somebody who's loose aggressive, I would know that he's capable of, counter-representing a hand like kings or aces. So I think there's a reasonable chance that if I did raise him here, he'd put me on ace king or pocket four just pretty much exclusively, or maybe like kings.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you raised here, he would put you on ace-king or pocket fours, ace-king 6-7, no suits type of hand, or some random
Yeah.
pocket fours. And I don't think it's bad to bluff raise this a little bit because it's
Right.
really hard for him to have a hand he can continue with, unless
Yeah.
he has.
But I mean, generally, if I did bluff raise, I'd want some kind of way out.
Yeah, it'd be nice to have a gutter or something. But
Right.
you know, a lot of the times, even on a board like that, he's not just going to call you out of position. He's just going to reshove on you. So.
Right. So here I peel with king, jack, 9, 3, suited the jack. I assume this is too loose?
Pre-flop's a little too loose, yeah. I mean, you're out of position. Your hand just plays really poorly. Then on this flop, I mean, if he had bet, it doesn't really matter what you do.
Right.
The turn, I would probably just bet for value now.
Yeah.
Though I think you see tens and jacks a lot, but I think you can check call the river here, actually.
Check call the river? Okay.
Because, if you did peel the turn with like 4, 5, 6 or diamonds or something, you want to let him induce. And I don't think he's going to value bet tens, jacks. He'll probably value bet kings or queens or aces if you check that back on the flop. But I think it's a fine spot to go ahead and just...
You don't think he'll value bet tens or jacks?
No. Tens and jacks would be really thin, I think, for him to value bet.
Huh.
I think that would be like
Okay.
a really thin bet on his part. But, by betting here, he's never going to call you really with worse. I mean...
Huh. Okay.
I think he'll call you
Well.
better. Well, I guess I was just proven wrong.
Yeah, he ends up calling it the worst.
Wow, what did he have there? I mean,
I don't know. Let me see if I check.
wow. I mean, that just seems... I guess, yeah. I guess good bet.
Right. Well, it's quite possible that I just ran into the bottom of his calling range there.
Yeah, I think when he checks that 9 deuce deuce flop, I think he has a lot of like tens, jacks, and queens in his range. Things that don't get check raised. Even kings or aces. So a lot of opponents will just check that back.
Right. Okay. So here I limp both of these hands, I guess, on the button, and I have kings on both. On the right one, I was playing a limp re-raise, I think, and on the left one, I was just going to limp call. What do you think of that in general?
I don't really like a limp re-raise with either of these hands, just because when you do, and he decides to 4-bet you, it's a really gross spot. I think limp calling to balance with king, king, jack, 5 rainbow is really good. I would just go ahead, though, and raise the king, king, jack, 7, though you have been limping a lot, so it's good to balance that as well.
Right.
So I think
I figure I've got to have something in my range to limp re-raise with.
Yeah, and I love this flop raise. It looks just so bluffy. I mean, it looks like you have air a lot, even though you haven't been too aggro with him that he's just going to fold a lot. But I think it looks bluffy, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I had the deck pretty crushed there with the two kings and one of the jacks.
Yeah, it's tough.
Okay, so here on the right, I peel with ace nine, five deuce, double suited, and I flop a pretty nice flop. I have nut flush draw and middle pair.
Yeah.
So what's your play? Would you check raise a bet? Would you check call?
I would just check raise, get it in. You got so much equity against everything but pocket kings, pocket nines, or pocket threes. And there's so many tough turns like this one to play that he might barrel you on. And you can't really, like, stacks are such that you can't really check raise bluff the turn. I mean, if he bets like 1,200 and you make it 4K and he shoves, it's like such a bad spot with a dry flush draw that with the backdoor hearts in the middle pair, I would have check raised, got it in on the flop.
Right, yeah, that definitely seems better against somebody who's going to have a lot of bluffing equity on later streets.
Yeah, I mean, this queen is such a tough card, and you would want to make a move at some point, you know? But it's like your hands are, I mean, you're just so tied. It's like, if you raise, are you raise folding when he shoves? Like, you know, it's just kind of a sick spot. It's a really sick spot. So,
So in this sixth spot, what would you end up doing?
probably fold the turn now.
Fold the turn. What about here on the left hand with the ace jack and the flush draw?
I would have called the flop like you did. So he raised pre, you flatted.
Yeah.
I would probably fold the turn as well. Again, I would fold them both. You just don't have enough showdown or equity to call the turn. You know, it's just, I mean, it's like,
I just can't fold anything. Yeah.
I mean, you know, there's just too many hands in his range that have equity, even if he's bluffing with some random king, you know? He's just value betting you, so. But I definitely would have raised table 2 on the flop. You know, like a hand like that, that's so unfortunate to let him show that hand down against you, and he could never raise the flop. But then on the turn, like a hand like that, he's just barreling to get value from flush draws and also fold you off better hands because he has pocket jacks. He's not going to get raised much, you know?
Right.
It's just...
Yeah, just really lame spot. I definitely should have raised the flop there. It was not a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then on the left table, he barrels it down till the river.
It's tough.
And the hand range that he's representing has gone down even further because now he can't really rep
10-8.
like 10-8 or stuff like that. Or yeah, exactly.
It's like he almost has to have 10-8, Queen 10 with diamonds, or he backdoor diamonds, but you just don't know. It's just a 6.
Yeah.
You know, it's a really...
Yeah, it's definitely a very difficult spot to play. And plus, you know, I can't really bluff call here either because you can turn so many hands into bluffs. So
yeah, you might have some...
it's almost a question of just jamming or folding.
Yeah.
So...
Jamming's not bad, actually, even against a guy like Nicky. I mean, I just think people give so much credit for backdoor flush draws like this. Like, I think he wouldn't fold like a jack high, but might fold like a baby flush, I think. Maybe a 7, 8 high flush.
Yeah, maybe.
Nicky.
or maybe not, you know. It's entirely possible that he would just not fold anything.
But against a macro guy like that, you know, just check calling there is not great, you know? His hands, so.
All right, so
I would...
Yeah, so you do on the left-hand table, I'm assuming? On the right?
Well, which one do you want to talk about first?
Well,
I guess
let's start on the left hand.
And on both, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Okay. So on the left hand, I limp King 665. Pretty weak hand, and it's got 3 suited cards, so it's not as good. But I assume I was going to limp fold this. I'm not sure if I was going to limp call it. I don't really know. And then I flop bottom set, and I guess I probably just raise the flop, which I guess is pretty standard against Nicky, who's going to be betting out a ton of hands in this flop.
Yeah, I think it's pretty thin raising with bottom set here. I think I'd prefer just a call. There's just, you know, if you get re-raised, you have to fold. There aren't that many draws he can have. You don't really mind if he, you know, gets to see a free turn with a 10 queen jack X type hand. So I probably just would have called the flop with my king 6 6 5 on this board.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so on the right now, I three bet with pretty good aces, ace, queen, 9 suited to the ace, and he calls, and the flop comes 8-4-3 rainbow. So I just bet out my standard 1200-ish, I think, was the bet on the flop,
I think I would
and
have bet more on that flop just because there's so many hands he's going to peel you with. You want to extract value from them. I mean, he's peeling with any 8, any 3, any 4, any gut shot, any open end straight draw. Like,
but you don't think he would just pot into me if he had an 8 or a 4 or a 3?
raise pot.
Yeah.
No. I think if he had an 8 with a draw, he would, but I don't think he would with a bad... Like, if he had a bad 8, he might not, no. He might just flat call.
Right.
If he has a 4, no, probably not. He's not going to raise you unless he has like a 4 with a gut shot or open and straight draw or something.
Okay. So the turn comes to king, and
Got a good step.
obviously, yeah, a reasonably good card for me to represent.
That's a great turn for you. I mean, you have the best hand on the flop. He's never slow playing you. And on the turn, that's just a great card for him, for you to continue. I mean, there's so few combos that you're going to run into that you're beat. Sucks when if he shoves the turn, but you got to barrel it. So
Yeah. Okay. So he ends up folding pretty quickly. And then on the left hand, I bet the jack turn, which doesn't really change much except makes the board a little bit drier, gives him more two-pair combos and whatnot. And I guess fills up queen 9. So I bet the turn, and then river flushes out, so I just check the river. And he ended up having 7-9 with no redraw, so he flatted the flop and then flatted the turn.
yeah, which is reasonable. And I just think your flop raise is a little too thin there, honestly. I mean, it's good to balance and mix it up. Problem is, a lot of the time when he flats you there, he'll have a dry 7-9 like he had, or he'll have a larger set or something. And, you know, there aren't too many hands that you don't mind him getting a free turn with. So I think I would just call there on table 1.
Okay. All right, so on the right I raise aces and flop top set and just bet out the flop. On the left I make a pretty loose pre-flop peel with ace, deuce, 4, 7 suited to the 7. You think this is too loose?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a little too loose. I mean, just doesn't flop well enough.
Right. And on the right, of course, I'm going to just bet my hand down pretty big. And the river completes the flush, so I just check it back.
Yeah, no real value in betting the river. I mean, holding an 8 as well, you have the deck pretty crippled for his made hand range. So.
And he ends up having ace 9.
Oh, wow. How did he never
just...
raise you?
I don't know. He just knows, man. He just knows.
On a board like that, I would have thought he would have raised the turn if he didn't raise the
turn. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, that's a great spot for him to check raise you on the turn, but it's unfortunate.
Right.
But
so
that's
here on the left I raise... yeah, go ahead.
It's also a good thing if he's not raising you on the turn. I mean, you can really semi-bluff him a lot then. So maybe I want to contradict what I said originally, because a lot of players, if they don't raise the flop there with a dry ace 9, they'll check raise the turn. But if he's not even doing that, then it's just such a good spot for you to barrel with all your...
well, I would guess it's a spot where he's mixing it up. I mean,
you think
I don't know what exactly he was thinking in that spot, but I don't think he would check call ace 9 always. That just doesn't seem right at all, given how aggressive.
So you think it was just kind of a random type hand?
Yeah, I think it was just kind of one of those things that he did, or maybe he had a feeling, or I don't know what he was thinking. But I don't think he would. I don't think you could see that.
Want to grab something out of the fridge or something or whatever.
Right.
Just hitting.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Okay, so on the left, I raise pre-flop with queens suited to the jack, or suited to the queen with a 6 dangler, and he 3-bets me and I call. Do you think that's pretty standard? Or he just folds?
These queens play so bad in 3-bet pots that you could fold, but he 3-bets you a lot, so it's probably okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have position, so we're deep enough that it's pretty valuable, I guess.
I don't really like calling with the ace 6 7 4. I think it's just a little too junky, and there's just too many flops you can't continue with. Though this one I wouldn't mind mixing in a raise there occasionally.
Right. Okay. Okay. So on the queens, I bet the flop basically as a bluff, and he ends up check calling me, and now I pick up a flush draw on the turn. Um, so I'm guessing that his range for check calling here would be, um, I guess it's kind of hard to construct. I guess like a few overpairs that are probably better than mine. Um, and I am not really sure what else that he'd be check calling here with.
So I really like the flop bet for a few reasons. One is I think you have the best hand so often that you might actually get value from some of his hands. I think his range are aces. Now that he's check called, I think his range is aces, kings, a five with a gutter, like 5, 6, 7, 8 type of hands,
Hmm.
or some weird like something he's slow playing 4, 6, ace 4, or
Possibly him like ace three, king queen or something as well. I would think.
ace
No,
what?
like an
Ace.
ace three, king queen, something like that
Yeah, if he had
as
two back
a
doors,
gut
he
shot.
might
Yeah.
like ace three king queen with two back doors. He might check call those type of hands.
Hmm. Right. So now that we get to the turn, what's your plan now? We picked up a flush draw.
Stacks are a little deep that you don't really want to bet and get shoved because his check shoving range is like 4, 6, ace 4, aces with turned clubs, kings with turned clubs. Um,
Hmm.
but I still think you're ahead of a lot of his range. Like I think a lot of his range is actually those last hands we discussed: 5, 6, 7, 8, ace, king, queen, 3. So I actually don't hate a bet on the turn here, both for value and as a bluff. I mean, you're trying to bluff him off aces and kings, but I think you'll get another street of value from something like a pair and a gut shot. So I would probably just go ahead and bet fold the turn, actually, something I wouldn't do much. I'd bet like 3, little less 2,800 or something.
Okay. Looks like I ended up checking behind and ended up nailing the flush too.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a tough
Um,
spot because even if he had bet out to you, would you have raised the river?
no, I think I would have just flattened him because
Yeah,
I mean, I don't think he's gonna. Well, like because like you said, a good amount of his range is gonna be something like 4-6 or something that's probably never gonna call, or a hand that's turning itself into a bluff, like maybe a 5-6 hand,
yeah,
or possibly a hand that he's check calling on the flop, like aces with something that end up hitting a flush in the river, or kings with a flush in
totally.
the river. So it's pretty hard to get value, even though on an absolute scale my hand is pretty strong. But I think the reason why I checked behind the turn was probably the hand range that I put him on. I assume was pretty similar to what you did, but kind of the fact that I beat a good amount of his hands and I have a lot of equity against the top of his range, and I can bluff some rivers. Um, maybe decided to check behind, but
Yeah.
betting might have been better. So, but now that we get to the river, I just fire out a bet, and I wanted to fire out a pretty big one because um, I think he's probably more inclined to call a bigger bet here because he likes a bluff catch, and it looks pretty. It looks a lot like I'm trying to win the pot here when the flush back doors,
Hmm.
and he ends up calling very quickly, and he ends up having what is that? Three. He checked all the flop with 3-6, and then turned a 10. So
Yeah.
turned tens up, and then snap called the river.
So that's very reasonable. I mean, that's a hand I could see. He has a gutter to the 4, um,
Mm-hmm.
and he has
Couple overcards, I guess.
yep, overcards and a pair and a backdoor flush draw. So,
Mm-hmm.
so it's just worth noting how light he'll peel those flops with, though, in re-raise pots.
Right. Yeah, it's definitely something I've gotten used to against Nikki. Okay, so here on the left with my appeal ace 3-4-7, and then the flop checks through, and then I lead out the turn 400 into 600. Do you think this is an okay spot to bet or no on the turn?
The turn, yeah, it's fine.
Right. Well, I think the turn is actually one of the spots where Nikki has a very, very, very low folding frequency compared to most players. So I think that when I bet the turn, I'm almost obligated to bet the river because he's peeling so many hands that he's checking back on the flop, and some of them probably with a plan to bluff as well. So I'm really not all that sure whether or not my turn bluff is okay uh, against Nikki in this situation, but it might be.
So then on the river, your bet is, oh, you didn't bet the river.
I
I
didn't
thought you
bet. No, yeah,
were.
no, I checked. Yeah, I mean, I think when the river it becomes a queen, I think betting it is probably really bad because Nikki's gonna rep the boat so often. I mean, he's going to try to push me off a flush or
But
whatever.
does he
Something
have
like
pure
that.
air that much? I mean, you might. I mean,
I
if
mean, I
you
don't
bet
think he has pure air, but he probably has some kind of, I don't know, pair and gutter, or maybe bare ace of hearts that he's going to bluff with or something. I don't know.
the okay.
I mean, I might be over extrapolating, but this is just one of those spots where, in my experience with Nicky, he tries really hard to win these sorts of spots.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it is, but I think it's also, I mean, because you might bet the turn there with like pocket kings or king queen, um,
Hmm.
and I don't mind just trying to bluff him off a jack 10 there on the river,
Right.
but that's few hands you're trying to bluff him off, so probably check folding is best.
Hmm. Okay. Do you know how
I don't,
long you've been going so far?
50 minutes. I
50
like
minutes.
this
Okay.
min raise here with the 10-10-5-6, and it's a great spot to fire all three barrels even against a guy like Nicky.
Yeah, definitely these blockers. It's a pretty mandatory bluffing situation.
Yeah, blockers and the flush draw. It's just a
Yeah.
really good spot. So.
Yeah, I min raised I did the same thing on the right with the 6-6-5-9. I think
I think mid raising is a really good strategy against Nicky.
yeah,
Um,
I think there might have been a time earlier in the previous match where I was min raising a lot against him, but I guess I probably got the feeling that it just wasn't really working. Okay, so here on the right, I end up potting out the flop here with uh, pocket nines, so an overpair, and then 6-5 for a straight draw. What do you
so as
think?
far as blind defense go, like this is a really marginal hand to be defending with. I mean, I know it looks kind of pretty, but it just flops so mediocre so often that
Mm,
against a good player like Nicky, probably folding is best. I mean, I can see your argument for calling, but it just flops so many non-nut hands. Like even 7-8 doesn't give it a nut wrap. Like it just doesn't, flop too many great hands. So I think folding preflop's probably best, honestly. Even though it does have immediate equity against his opening range,
right,
I
right.
just think you can profitably play it because of
Hmm.
some future streets being out of position. So
Okay, so what do you think once we get to the flop about leading out here?
I think leading's fine. Yeah.
Okay, and he folds instantly, so I'm not all that sure about how much respect he gives my leads, but I guess he isn't going to screw around with nothing. But I would guess that he probably puts me on, like, my leading range, he probably puts a lot of two pairs in my range, just from the way he's been playing so far.
Okay.
Um,
And here I
okay,
would
so,
definitely bet fold this flop with two back doors and the pair of queens. Your hand just doesn't really improve very much. I mean, really the only turn you want is a six, and it's just fine to bet fold that flop even against an opponent as aggressive as Nicky because there's so few turns that you can continue on.
hmm okay,
So, and he's going to bet a lot, so I just would have bet folded that flop.
right, well, I guess I just like to check it down. I would expect myself to bet the turn, though,
I
but
think
I guess I
checking
end up,
the turn is fine.
okay. All right, so on the left, I raise kings with an 8 on the side, and then I flop top pair, or and I flop an overpair, I guess. And then I bet the flop and he calls, and the turn comes another 8. So, um,
I would
I
actually
guess
turn
that's
my
the end of
hand
the
into a bluff there. I think that's a great spot where you might have the best hand, but also it's a really good spot to turn your hand into a bluff and fire two barrels, even against a guy like Nicky. It's very unlikely that he has the nut flush draw because you were never raised on the flop or pre-flop. You hold the
Hmm.
king of clubs, so his best flush is going to be a queen, and I don't think he hardly ever has a full house, so I would have gone ahead and I would have fired all three barrels. I think he calls the turn a lot with like queen high flush, jack high, 10 high flush, but I think you can get him off it on the river, particularly a 6 river. So I would have fired two streets there as a bluff.
Yeah, it makes a lot of
Plus,
sense.
plus he might also just have a random 8 with like a gutter straight draw or something, and you could bluff him off that on the river as well. Or, if he has like ace 8, 5, 6, or ace 8, 6, 7 type of thing. Well, not anymore.
Right.
But, in this case, you did have the best hand, but I think that's a really good spot to go ahead and mix in turning a hand into a bluff.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I never really thought about that. All right, so here on the right, I three bet pre-flop with ace, king, queen, deuce, suited to the king. A little bit trashy as far as the deuce dangling and the suited to the king. You think it's fine at a three bet though?
I think it's a little too trashy.
Okay.
I think when you go
Um,
that it's a horrible spot, and
right.
it just doesn't play that well on many flops. So
Mhm. So I three bet and he calls, and the flop comes 10-4-3.
mhm.
So I bet out the flop with my gutter and a few overcards, I guess, and he calls. And then the turn comes a king, which is, I guess, one of the best cards for me.
Yeah,
So at this point, I have two gut shots, and I have top pair.
yep,
And so I just bet out the turn, and then hope that he, I guess, either calls or folds.
yeah. I mean, it sucks if you get raised on the turn, but
Yeah.
I mean, not much you can do. I don't think.
Okay. So I bet out the turn on the right, and then on the left, I called from the big blind with 5-5-4-3, and then check called this flop. You think check calling here is the play?
Yeah, I definitely think that's the best line.
Okay. And I just checked the turn, I guess, intending to check fold.
I actually don't mind check calling the turn and bluffing a lot of rivers. I think you can represent any club, any maybe even any backdoor spade too, and lead out on the river. And your draw is really disguised. So if a three
Right.
four comes, I mean, if like you check call the turn and the river is a club and you bet out into him, I think even a guy like Nicky is going to fold
What do you
anything.
think
But
about just straight potting out this turn?
um, on table one, I think
Yeah, on the first table.
that looks like a lot of draws, like something like clubs which turn spades, but it also looks like something like ace queen. So I
Hmm.
think it's reasonable to pot out. Maybe you check called with ace, queen, jack, nine, and turn to queen.
Hmm.
So now you have like a gutter and a queen in top two
Right.
pair. So I think that's reasonable.
Okay.
I
Um,
think I prefer to check call and lead a lot of rivers. So now on
right.
table two, you get shoved on
Yeah.
six, but I mean, it's really gross. It's really gross. I don't know. It's actually, I didn't realize how deep you were on the turn. It's probably close to a fold.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I folded in the spot. I mean, just hard to see him folding or shoving a lot of hands, given that I can have so many really solid hands in the spot.
The thing is, with King 10 there, I mean, you've still got, I mean, if he has like King 10, 8, 9, you've got four fives, four queens, or three
Two queens.
queens,
Yeah.
four jacks. I mean, that's so much equity, you
Uh-huh.
know? I mean, it's pretty gross. I think it's pretty close to bet call, bet fold, honestly.
Hmm.
I mean, because, yeah, I mean, I'd have to run some numbers, but
Yeah, I wasn't totally sure, but I knew I had a good amount of equity, and it felt really gross folding, but I'm pretty sure I ended up folding there.
yeah.
And on the left, what I ended up doing was, I don't know if you saw, but I bet like 300 into a $1,400 pot.
Yeah, I think that's a great bet because you're never going to have the nuts there, and you want to represent something like ace 10, ace queen type of hand, and I think that's the best way to do it. So
Hmm.
I really like your river bet there. Plus, it just gets him to fold all his complete junk hands.
Right. Okay, well let's go ahead and end the video here. I think yeah, it ended around this the session ended around this spot, and let's see. I think we over this session maybe lost like 4 or 5 thousand since the previous video. So um, I guess ended around fairly even since the last video. So up around 10K maybe. Oh no, wait, my bad. I have 42K on the stable, so I guess I made 7 or 8K
Yeah.
approximately. Yeah.
So it's a good result for you. And on that
Yeah.
last hand, you have 30% equity against King 10. So,
Against American 10.
yeah,
Okay.
so it's
So
pretty close. I mean, you had to
I'm
call.
calling 10K into a 20K pot.
Yeah.
So I guess it would have to be full then, right?
It's a fold if he's never, I mean, some of the time he might have 10 queen jack, 10 9 queen jack type of hands that might
Yeah.
sway it. So So probably with those hands in his range, it's probably just barely a call, but it's like probably so close it doesn't matter what you do.
Right. I mean, there are also, I guess, sets in his range.
Yeah,
So,
that's true. Yeah, I forgot about that. So yeah, it's probably a fold then. You're probably
yeah,
right.
and of course some like kings with some of my cards blocked. So if he has like ace king 10 or something, then I'm in really bad shape.
So
Yeah.
tough spot though there on the turn. Pretty gross.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess that's it. Thanks a lot for commenting on these videos with me.
And thanks for having me watch them. It was great.
Right. So I guess that's it. So this has been Internet Pokers
And Brian Townsend.
for CardRunners.com, and thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next time.